what I've been really pleasantly surprised by is I work for some of my corporate clients are publicly traded. And so they are rated by external banks and investment agencies that are looking at ESG. So traditional ESG ratings. I kind of expected, oh, there's going to be a big pushback. Nobody's going to want to get these ratings. It hasn't really happened because to the investors, ESG ratings are really just looking at what is materially and financially relevant to your business. So for beauty companies, what's materially relevant and social is your human resources and your chemical safety. Okay, well, if I'm investing in a company, I want to make sure they're keeping high quality talent because we know beauty requires a good amount of education, that you need high quality talent. And also, I want to make sure that you're following chemical safety regulations. There's nothing woke about that. It's just making sure you're running your business responsibly. And so, as much as the political discourse gets really caught up in who's doing what and what words we can use, at the end of the day, investors want to make money and they want to see a return on their investment. And if those ratings are providing them valuable insight into how a business manages financial risks, that's still valuable. So I've been pleasantly surprised there hasn't been as much pushback because I think at the end of the day, people recognize where their money's coming from and they're willing to hold true to that, which, you know what, capitalism is what it is. So
Hello, I'm Mike Ryan. I'm the Chief Networking Officer at PIMS, and welcome to our second season of Minutes with Mike. Now in my 33rd year at PIMS, I've had the privilege of partnering with companies both large and small, supporting their PR and marketing through customized fulfillment and distribution that delivers measurable impact on their brand perception, boosts positive affinity, and fuels their overall brand performance. And throughout my career, I've had the chance to work alongside many talented folks. This is their story. On this show, we'll sit down with some of the world's top marketing and business thought leaders to learn more about their success, how they got there, how marketing helped them achieve their goals, what strategies they used, and what inspires them. Please join me on this journey as we learn from those who are changing the way we think about business. So sit back, enjoy. You're listening to Minutes with Mike.
Welcome, everybody, to Minutes with Mike. Maggie Spicer is my guest today. I'm so excited. Welcome to the program, Maggie.
thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Maggie is, of course, the founder of Source Beauty and an attorney and a sustainable business strategist. I had to practice on that one a little bit, but excited to get into the nuts and bolts of that. But as I do with most guests on the program, people are really curious as to sort of what your background is prior to sort of getting into this world. Now, I know you're an attorney. Your education sort of preemptively aimed you in that direction, as it certainly would be. But how did you get into this whole world that we're in now? How did it all begin?
It's definitely not been a linear journey, I will say. But so I feel like so many of us in the beauty industry kind of found our way here through lots of twists and turns. So I'm no different in that sense. So like you said, my background is as a lawyer. So I had a background in human rights. I became a supply chain lawyer because I really liked working with businesses. I loved figuring out how things were made and where they were. I worked in factories and in maritime lumber yards in Canada. I mean, I was kind of all over the place as a lawyer, which was fun because I liked getting my hands dirty. Well, figuratively, not literally getting my hands dirty. They never let the lawyers touch any of the machinery. But I was really interested in stuff. How was stuff made? How do you build systems to make things better? I worked in sustainability at the time, so really looking at compliance within the supply chain. And then separately, I just had a real love for the beauty industry. So beauty was kind of my sanity break from my legal career. So I had a beauty blog for a long time. I had worked in beauty retail when I first was a baby lawyer in Washington, D.C. So beauty was always a really fun outlet for me creatively. I ran a brand for a very short period of time that I had built up using ingredients from small independent producers in the US just to see what the supply chain would look like. And when I was at Amazon, I really got to kind of understand what it meant to be an in-house supply chain. Like, what did it mean to be working directly with a business where you're fully embedded in all the different aspects? And I just felt like there was this huge white space that I knew from a lot of brands that I had connected with over the years where they wanted to operationalize sustainability. They wanted to understand how they could benefit from it. And they just didn't have anybody to help them make it all make sense. So I left Amazon and just decided to, start a firm that focused on the legal and the strategic sides of sustainability, but exclusively for beauty. And just hit our 4-year anniversary yesterday. So it's been
Congratulations. That's
yeah,
great.
it's been really exciting just to see the breadth of the brands that are really trying to integrate sustainability into their growth, figuring out how it gets them competitive advantage, how they can build better products, how they can be more profitable. A lot of things that we don't typically talk about with sustainability, but they're critical for businesses to be financially sustainable. So it's been a very, I would say, winding journey to get here, but I feel like it's a real culmination of a lot of things that I love to do and to talk about.
It sounds like, as you explain it, that beauty was very much targeted, or it seemed very natural to that to be the sort of end result of what you were looking for to be a part of that world. And for me, being in that beauty space as well, it makes absolute perfect sense. And what you've hit upon, what your agency is working on, is beyond needed, right? It's the perfect operational solve for so many problems. But do you find that is it solely beauty? I mean, I can't imagine it's solely beauty, but would you say that, you know, that is the biggest market value to this whole world of ours?
Yes. I mean, I do work with some companies that are also, they may have a fashion vertical. They might have beauty and wellness is now pretty much going hand in hand. So a lot of what I do sometimes will touch on other consumer facing industries. But within the beauty industry, I remember when I first started out, everyone's like, oh, that's such a niche. Beauty's such a niche industry. I mean, it's $1 billion industry
Yeah,
globally.
yeah.
So when you're looking at numbers that big, they're always you've got, consistent themes, similar sustainability themes that you'd see across any industry. But then beauty and wellness really has very specific challenges, specific opportunities that relate to sustainability. And so I felt like it was important to really pick a lane and speak that language. And what you see is the brands who understand how to do anything related to sustainability, whether it's product design or marketing, in a way that makes sense for them as a for profit beauty business. That's when it really succeeds. And I'll flag that I'd say probably 70% of my clients are anybody from an independent brand to a large retail. I do a lot of retailer work. None of them are focused on sustainability. They're not sustainable brands necessarily. Some of them are, and I love working with them because they're already bought in. It's their mission. But the majority of the brands I work with, sustainability is not their thing. It's just that they've recognized that they had challenges related to sustainability, or they saw opportunity related to that same kind of bucket of themes where they're like, we can get market share. We can succeed as a business if we capture this. And that's why they're interested. And that's great. Not every brand has to be a sustainable brand to take advantage of all of that.
Let's jump back to the Amazon, because I certainly didn't want to sort
Yeah.
of glaze over that. But, would you say it would be fair to ask, in your time at Amazon, I feel like, again, we say this about a lot of different topics, but sustainability, I feel like, is just a sort of a living and breathing thing. And just like the internet of old, and the creators and influencers nowadays, it changes a lot day to day, week to week. You know, very specific to what the target audience is. But would you say at your time there, where was it, and as far as Amazon's concerned, and what did you develop and create there?
Oh, that's a great question. So I was the supply chain regulatory attorney. So if you think about within Amazon, you've got retail and then you've got essentially the tech side. So that's run under AWS. So I sat on the tech side. And so what we were doing was working directly with the businesses. So Amazon, we think about it as one business, it's hundreds of businesses underneath that one umbrella. And so I was working with dozens of businesses to understand their supply chains, understand where we were getting certain components from, where things were going back and forth, because in the manufacturing process, it's not A to B, it's A to B to C to D, then it goes back to B. And it's incredibly complex. You're crossing geographic barriers, you're crossing different classifications of goods. So it's incredibly complicated. And at every stage, you need to make sure that you have compliance systems built in to know that the goods are going to where they're allowed to go, they're done the right way, that you are working with partners that you vetted. And that's actually a huge piece of what I do now is a lot of supplier governance for brands because what brands tend to struggle with is understanding their supply chains. And this came up quite frequently with the recent round of tariffs was everyone was getting hit on the receiving end of the tariffs and they had no visibility on their upstream supply chain. So it was kind of a surprise to them. A company like Amazon is not going to be surprised by that because they have that supply chain locked down. They know where everything is coming from, where it's going, and they do such deep supplier vetting because they want to work with the best partners. Obviously for a lot of different reasons, but it mostly means they're an incredibly resilient business because they know exactly who they're working with. They know those suppliers' weak points, their strengths. If an earthquake happens in some region outside of Indonesia, they know which suppliers are going to be affected and all the repercussions that's going to have on their downstream supply chain. So I was involved in helping the businesses just make happen what needed to happen, but within the supply chain.
Such a good point too, because and who better to answer that question than you? But you work with small company, you work with large companies. There's the billion-dollar corporations on this end, and then there's the startups that have two or three people, and they're trying to figure out their valuation. The brands that do the real work underneath are much more prepared when things get difficult. When talking about things like tariffs, right? Like the raising of those tariffs, I can much to like, when we're going through the COVID world, right? It's something that hit you unexpectedly. If you're not prepared for it from the word go, it's going to be almost an impossible, not impossible, but like to navigate that, you'd either have to, bring in somebody of your ilk to be able to help lead the way on that, or, sort of figure it out as you go. Talk to me a little bit about that. Some of the, maybe the clients you were dealing with or what you saw in the marketplace between the larger and the small companies, because I don't think there was a real difference into what their struggles were, but what were some of those struggles?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the struggles really relate to scale because smaller companies and independent companies and companies that are scaling, a lot of times are outsourcing quite a lot. So you don't have visibility into your upstream supply chain. You're kind of at the will of your wholesaler, your distributor, your contract manufacturer, your packaging supplier. And so if you're not working with a supplier or a CM who's giving you visibility into where they're getting the stuff from, you're kind of at the whim of the market and the supply and what's available when. And if that price goes up, you're just kind of out of luck. And I don't say this to make brands feel bad. A lot of that information is not available. It's you can push and push, and the CM's gonna go, "It's been very nice chatting with you. Good luck finding somebody else is gonna get it for you." So, it's a real challenge. And I think brands at scale, this is where you can kinda scale the systems into that visibility because the more that you can be digging into, okay, we wanna at least know country of origin. Like, we wanna know where this stuff is coming from so that we can at least predict out where we might see some challenge points, some friction. Understanding country of origin is also really helpful because when you're applying tariff rates, as we've also seen, tariff volatility can be really, really challenging for a brand to absorb. We are working with tight margins in a lot of the consumer goods industries and especially in beauty. So if all of a sudden your packaging is 20% more expensive, you don't have the time to pass that cost on to the consumer. It's hitting you now. And so if you're able to at least see where your country of origin is, even at a high level, that can be really, really helpful, even just in kind of doing that long-term risk planning.
Right, right.
And then you can try to be a little bit more affirmative in, okay, well, we want to source from this country. We want to be looking at this. A lot of times, most brands, especially as they're scaling, will use like a freight forwarder. Well, they're rolling all those costs in and then they're just adding in a margin and then they pass it on to you. You have to work with somebody to break those numbers apart. And all of a sudden, at a certain point, it tips where actually, if you bring that in house, you could be saving a ton of money. So I have a customs attorney that I work with, and she and I often work on supply chain projects together because I need to know where things are being sourced from a sustainability and supply chain resilience standpoint. She wants to know about the tariff rates, the customs duties, all of that. Once you start unpacking it, it's kinda like you're finding quarters in the couch, and then all of a sudden you find like a $10 bill and it's like Christmas.
Right.
It's a messy process, but once you get in there and you start seeing at what point is it going to make sense for us to bring this in-house, the brands can kind of predict that out, put it on their roadmap. Maybe it's 2, 3 years. Maybe it's we should have been doing this yesterday, and then all of a sudden it's worth it to hire someone in-house, manage your kind of logistics, and then you can be saving a lot of that money. And then you just keep that as in your profit margin, which is great.
I found a quote that you had said that sort of ties in with that, where you said, "We don't want to regress, but we are also overwhelmed by tariffs. It's not a paperclip, right?" So, and you hit it right on the head. So this is not just one thing you're looking at. You're talking everything from packaging to suppliers, ingredients, shipping, country to country. And as a distributor myself who does fulfillment, I can say that is absolutely 100% accurate. Like shipping stuff to France is a lot different than shipping stuff to Germany, and so on and so forth along the way.
Yeah.
When a client comes to you, and engages you, because I know you mentioned that you said it's about a 3 to 6 month engagement that you have with clients typically. What does the first week look like? Like, how do you sort of open it up to the clients? Because sometimes, and we talk about this quite a bit on the program too, sometimes clients are hiring you to tell you the things that they don't want to hear, right? Like to make sure that they know. And things like you
Yeah.
just mentioned, packaging and stuff that are claimed online, or we're going to get into that a little bit later, but claimed or not claimed online are things to look at. But like, what problems, what are some problems that you find universal when they come to you that they
Yeah.
want to address?
I find a lot of companies that come to me will identify one problem, and what we end up doing is almost inverting that problem into a larger strategy, because typically they're feeling the pain somewhere, but they don't realize it's like when you have a oh, my shoulder hurts, but it's actually because you've hurt your lower back. It's really hard when you're in a company to understand all the things that are contributing to one particular pain point. What I do is go in and we'll have a very broad, I do a diagnostic with everybody. So it doesn't matter if you're a pre-launch brand with a venture capital behind you, or you're $25 million a year and you've been cooking for a while. We'll do a diagnostic to figure out what are the visible pain points. So oftentimes it's we don't know how to market our products strategically to highlight sustainability because we think we can get a little bit of extra consumer buy-in. Again, these are not brands that are sustainability focused, but they're like, why can't we try to play in that space? Or they wanna join a retailer sustainability program, and then we'll kind of strategically play out which one makes sense, what's the roadmap for that. Oftentimes, it's packaging. What does the eco design for the packaging need to look like to meet all these new regulations that are coming into the US? And then it's supply chain. So I oftentimes will kind of do a diagnostic across all the different operational pieces to say, well, maybe we don't need to just laser focus here. Why don't we build in some opportunity across all of these so that everything's kind of it's like the positive momentum. Once that flywheel starts moving, I try to bring in as many teams as possible because ideally by the end of the project, I should be able to leave. I'm available for questions, but like I hand it off. I've trained the team. You can run this now. And so they leave with a pretty well packaged roadmap. We've implemented some of the early stage projects and then they're trained up to do the long term work. And oftentimes I'll revisit work with a client every like 18 months because they'll have implemented what we talked about, then they're ready for the next one. So it's really, seeing those pain points and figuring out if we de-risk over here, how can we make that also an opportunity to get some new market share, to strategically leverage our audience? Like how can we make it an opportunity rather than de-risking is nobody's favorite topic. No, but risk mitigation has never gotten anybody excited except for maybe me and 9 other lawyers. So I am sympathetic to that. I wanna find a way to make you money while we are also doing the good work and making the business as resilient as possible.
And a natural reaction for new brands, smaller brands coming into the marketplace, is they want to compare themselves to, the big boys, the Estes and the L'Oreals of the world, right? You say they should not be doing that for a number of different reasons, I'm assuming. What's the minimum a brand should be looking at? Like if they want to make sure that they are sort of engaged with sustainability, and you mentioned the leave behind you leave with them, but what's the minimum you would like to see these smaller come to market brands be
Yeah.
able to do, who
Yeah.
don't have the big over, the money to?
Yes. Well, and it's all about scaling. It's all about scaling and building a realistic roadmap because what I struggle with is when I see a brand and they've bitten off more that they can chew in one space and they're really neglecting other areas that make more sense for them as a business. So I will often not work with a company if they don't have a clear, like a business plan. If they don't know who they are, who their target customer is, their expected retail distribution, like you need to have all that locked down because anything you build and scale should align very well with that. So for a lot of the brands, it's building the architecture essentially of your strategy that can scale. If you say we want to do responsible palm oil, Estee Lauder's got 15 people working on that. So best of luck.
Right. Right.
Maybe you have a responsible sourcing policy where you have 10 questions that you use when you're vetting a new ingredient supplier, when you're working with your contract manufacturer. And that goes into your product development philosophy, where your product developers are saying, okay, well, we have a younger consumer. They might be interested in biotechnology. They're not so put off by that. So why don't we look for biotech alternatives to palm oil? Or we want to do responsible palm. Like there's all sorts of ways you can tailor it, but the reason I always start with that diagnostic is to say, who are you as a brand and what makes sense for you? Because what makes sense for L'Oreal, it might not be your brand DNA. And then it's never going to feel authentic and it's going to be very uncomfortable to scale. So I want a system that I know can scale from 0 to 5 million, 5 to 25, 25 to 50. And then when you're ready for an exit, you've got a data room for that VC fund to go into, and they're checking the boxes. You're making your life easier down the road.
Really well said. One thing on Minutes with Mike we never talk about is politics and religion, or two things I should say. But I'm curious, politics and environmental looks and feels. That's got to tie into this too, right? Because depending on who is running this. Some people are really high on the environmental pushback and feelings and thoughts about where people should be and govern them accordingly. Others do not. And with that, everything has to sort of shift and move along with that. Do you find that sort of ties in there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're obviously in an administration politically where there has been some pushback on things like corporate sustainability reporting. And there was this consumer trend towards, okay, we want to hear all the sustainability claims. And now we're kind of pushing back. There's kind of these natural cycles we go through because everybody jumps on the bandwagon of everyone's sustainable. And then after a while, people start going, I don't think this actually makes any sense. So to me, it's kind of a natural correction. Everybody gets on the bandwagon, and then the best players are the ones that outlast and retain the market value. The other ones kind of fall by the wayside and lose trust. So if anything, there's kind of a natural market correction there. What I've been really pleasantly surprised by is I work for some of my corporate clients are publicly traded. And so they are rated by external banks and investment agencies that are looking at ESG. So traditional ESG ratings, and that's environment, social, and governance. I kind of expected, there's going to be a big pushback. Nobody's going to want to get these ratings. It hasn't really happened because to the investors, ESG ratings are really just looking at what is materially and financially relevant to your business. So for beauty companies, what's materially relevant and social is your human resources and your chemical safety. Okay, well, if I'm investing in a company, I want to make sure they're keeping high quality talent because we know beauty requires a good amount of education, that you need high quality talent. And also, I want to make sure that you're following chemical safety regulations. There's nothing woke about that. It's just making sure you're running your business responsibly. And so, as much as the political discourse gets really caught up in who's doing what and what words we can use, at the end of the day, investors want to make money and they want to see a return on their investment. And if those ratings are providing them valuable insight into how a business manages financial risks, that's still valuable. So I've been pleasantly surprised there hasn't been as much pushback because I think at the end of the day, people recognize where their money's coming from and they're willing to hold true to that, which, you know what, capitalism is what it is. So we'll accept it as it is.
All of this, of course, ties into marketing, but it's not all about marketing, right? But with the marketing end of things and, the selling end of things, there's a fair amount of greenwashing that goes on because brands want to make sometimes claims that aren't 100% right, but they're not wrong either. They're not intentionally lying about things. They just don't fully understand the claims they're making, right? Could you give us some examples of any, without naming names or
Yeah.
brands, of any
Yeah.
greenwashing that you say might kind of sort of
Yeah. I'll give you a couple examples of the just the gray area because like you said, most brands are not maliciously greenwashing. They're they just don't know, and I do empathize with a lot of marketing teams because brands treat marketing as, well, sustainability is your problem. It's a cross-functional issue. Sustainability is a theme that lives across all the different functions. So marketing should be talking to product development, they should talk to regulatory, like we should all be in the same room. So a lot of times, we've seen kind of the claims that we think about with greenwashing, but there are some trickier claims. So one that I see a lot is brands that will talk about recycled content. And PCR is kind of the standard post-consumer recycled, inputs. And you can see that with plastic, you see that with glass. When the US, the green guys actually say if you're using post-industrial recycled glass, PIR, you really shouldn't call that industrial or you shouldn't call that recycled content. And a lot of brands get this wrong. They'll say 20% recycled content and I will ask, "Can you show me the documentation?" And it's PIR glass. The reason that we don't want to call PIR glass recycled content is because when we talk about recycled content, it should be diverted from a waste stream. It was going to go to a landfill, but we captured it and we diverted it back. PIR glass is if you think about bottles on a conveyor belt, there's a certain amount of glass that just ends up broken on the floor. They just sweep that back right into the furnace and it's part of the manufacturing process. That's not really waste diversion. That's just what happens in manufacturing. And this has been specifically addressed by the FTC, and brands never, never get it right. And so it's really important just to what I do with a lot of brands is we do a claims validation matrix. Every claim you're making across social media, on your packaging, on your website. It's a fun week with me and the marketing team to put all this together. And then I make a matrix and we have a validation for each one of those claims. And I want to be able to click in and see the document. And if that matrix isn't ready to go to your legal team, if you get sued, it's not done. And it's a pretty straightforward exercise, but you'd be surprised how many brands just haven't done the work. And then when they have it, they're like, "We're good to go." Like
Yeah.
they're excited because now they're like, we can go from green hushing, which is the fear of making these claims, to really getting to get most bang for their buck out of what they've done because they feel safe and confident in making those claims. And that's what you want. You want to make claims that you can stand by and feel good about, then you're golden.
Yeah, because consumer confusion, I mean, that don't help anybody, right? Like that might, get you where you want to be, but you're gonna have to go back and redo that. And sometimes that kicks you in the teeth. Can you tell the fake money logo story?
Okay, this is another area where I think being a lawyer, it really hits me hard when I see this one. Because what a lot of brands do, and I am notorious for walking around Whole Foods and then Instagram DMing brands when I see them do this, because it really gets me,
Okay.
is if you're a brand and you're trying to communicate to a consumer, a lot of times we don't have a lot of real estate on the package. So you use a third-party certification, which is great because those logos are small, they're clear images, consumers usually get them. But brands, and I won't name names, but they're out there. Brands are notorious for, well, I didn't want to pay to be cruelty-free certified or Leaping Bunny certified. So I had my designer just mock up a little bunny in a circle and I slapped it on the packaging. It's not a real logo, but it's communicating what I want it to communicate. Brands are free to put whatever they want with obvious limitations on their packaging, but when it looks like the intellectual property of a certification body, that's an actual issue. Like you could have a cease and desist letter coming at you. So not only does it kind of misrepresent what you're talking about, but also it could raise legal problems. So you really don't want to do this. I've seen the bunny. This morning, I saw one that was a number one in a circle, but it wasn't the 1% for the planet logo. It was just one, just the number one. And the problem is, you're going to have consumers like me who will go, "Oh, that's fantastic. I wonder who they donated to." And then I go on the 1% for the planet website. Oh, they're not there. And then I go on the brand website and they go, "Oh, we give 1% of our profits to environmental causes." I'm like, to who? Like, what causes? Like, you know, it doesn't actually accomplish what you want it to accomplish. And so that's where I really want brands to take on board this kind of comprehensive snapshot. Are we creating risk with very little ROI? And if so, how do we flip that where we see a huge amount of investment while we lower the risk. Like that's the balance we want.
Right. What is regarding regulatory issues, what do you see coming down the pipe, whether it's something that's gonna be, integrated, like, by law, which has been a long time coming, or you just see a lot of sort of conversations around that topic? What do you see as the
Yes.
next thing happening?
Extended producer responsibility is the big one in the US right now. And this has been coming for a while, but everyone's still playing catch up. So, this is essentially the states are creating these systems to put the onus on brands to pay for building the infrastructure to recycle the products that they sell. That's a very simplified version. But if I sell shampoo and conditioner in the state of California, if the product is made of PET plastic and I sell 100,000 units, I have to tell the state of California, I've sold this weight of this material, and then they've assigned a fee to that material. So you sell this much of this is your fee, and you add it up on all the materials you sell. And ideally, that money will then go to making sure that material is recycled. This is a huge challenge for beauty brands because, I mean, our packaging is very complicated. You've got lots of mixed materials, you've got small components that can't be recycled. So, understanding the fee schedules for all the states that you qualify for is very complicated. But then this is where we talk about like the risk to opportunity. Then you have ways of actually creating more sustainable packaging design and then getting the fees down. So it's called eco modulation. If you modulate the design of your packaging towards more environmental attributes, those fees go down. And the great thing about that is, yes, you're helping with EPR, but there are also some states with minimum recycled content mandates. If you're selling in Europe, you've got huge initiatives around sustainability and packaging. So those investments play out in a number of different places, but it's something that brands are still very early on in doing. Same thing with marketing. The types of claims that you can make, we're finally getting a little bit more robust in how we validate claims, the types of claims you can make. California is really cracking down on what kinds of packaging can be called recyclable because the infrastructure is really not there to recycle most of what we create. And so they will severely limit what can be called recyclable, but they're also dispelling this belief that, oh, well, if I throw it in my curbside recycling bin, it'll be recycled. Most of it's not. So, we're kind of course correcting in terms of let's collect the money to build the infrastructure. Let's make sure consumers actually understand what's recyclable. Let's make sure brands are incentivized to design for recyclability. So this like this full picture of the life cycle of a product is now fully within the brand's purview.
That's a good segue too into my next point, which I popped into my brain as you were responding to that, and that's, the US has long done a lot of this manufacturing abroad, right? And in that time, strategies have been developed to deal with that, whether it's, factory allocation or skilled labor, raw materials, whatever it's going to be supporting that. Some people feel like this is the time to just sort of cut ties and everything happens in the US starting today. Others feel like it could take some time, maybe. And then there's yet still others that are like, it's never going to happen. Where do you stand on that as far as the being a realistic option for, complete US
Yes.
usage?
I'm very much of the middle two, it's never gonna happen end of the paradigm. And honestly, I think we have to question why do we want it to happen? I mean, tariffs are self-imposed,
Yeah.
right? These are not natural systems. These are artificial systems to create balances of trade. So tariffs come and go. What do we want to specialize? What is our competitive advantage in the United States? Manufacturing might not necessarily be it. Innovation, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology. I mean, that's really where we excel. And that's something I find really exciting. I don't think there's a huge market for aluminum pumps made in Wisconsin. There are some brands that are, but that's going to take so much investment and so much time. What I would love to see is more openness around what are the channels and flows of trade where we can get the materials that we want, more sustainable materials, and how can we kind of be building this larger ecosystem for brands to build more sustainably? Sometimes that is nearshoring. So onshoring is when you come domestically. Nearshoring, I have so many brands now that are talking about, well, if we're going to move out of China, let's look at Canada and Mexico. Mexico has a huge manufacturing hub. That's fantastic because putting something on a truck from Mexico is so much more efficient than putting something on a cargo ship from China. So there are definite advantage to kind of changing the lens through which you look at your supply chain. But this also goes back to you have to have visibility in your supply chain before you can engage in that exercise, right? Like you've got to know where your stuff's coming from. And so once you start kind of pulling that thread, you can think about what's valuable to me as a company. Also, what's valuable to us as an industry. When I work with larger companies who are really focused on sustainability and supply chain visibility, they want to work with companies in regions that are more likely to have kind of an open book in terms of their sustainability. That's harder in Asia because they just aren't as responsive, but they also have a lock on the market. So, in their defense, they don't really need to be that responsive.
Right.
Versus European suppliers, they're going to be more expensive, absolutely more expensive. But because they are in the EU, where there are significantly stronger sustainability regulations, baked into that more expensive price is significantly stronger sustainability performance. So that's why when we're talking about costing, it's really figuring out, okay, yes, it's a book price. You know how much you're going to pay for it. But what else goes into that cost other than just the direct good that you're buying?
Maggie, this is what we called back in the day red tape, right? Like, so on my end, because we're in that fulfillment world and some of our capabilities go to support things like custom packaging and just offset and digital printing. A lot of times, we would engage a client and they would be doing their due diligence on their end to make sure that they're finding the proper vendor or partner that's going to have the sustainability option, right? And as those timing delays turned into real time for us because we're like, okay, now they have to kind of go back through this red tape and check everything on their end. Really ties in well what you opened up with earlier, saying that this sort of foundational support created by these companies, large and small, pays off in silver dollars as each step, including little things like this. Well, I say little, but like decision making tasks like this, where you can, obviously just connect dots and be like, that's not something we want to get into, or of course we want to get into that. Do you see that sort of in real time unfold with clients as they're sort of engaging vendors and partners?
Yes. If anything, the easiest way to predict out this is going to be a vendor we want to work with, regard sustainability, just straight vendor relationship, is their level of responsiveness. If they are not responsive when I'll be working with a company, we're onboarding 5 new vendors every quarter, for example. And so I run their supplier due diligence program and we're sending a quick vetting question. Part of the regular RFP at this point. So it's not anything creates 10 questions. There will always be 1 or 2 companies that won't respond to my inquiry, and it's coming through the sales team. Like, I'm not just randomly emailing them, like, it's through the channel. If they don't respond to me, odds are they're not gonna be responsive to the sales like, you could just tell right away they're gonna be the problem child of the batch.
Yes.
So, it's funny, you can see these kind of early red flags of there's a reason they don't wanna talk to us. Odds are they're not just ignoring us on this one channel. It's gonna be a problematic relationship. And so, it's not a one-to-one correlation, but you can tell when you're going to have a trusted vendor relationship. And what we wanna see is longevity. Like, long term the big guys know that long-term relationships are money in the bank because in this industry, especially, relationships are everything. And when you are responding to supply chain volatility that you had no control over, when you can call a vendor and say, hey, I know this is not XYZ in our contract, but we've got this issue. Can you help us? A company that was responsive, that has their house in order, and acts as a responsible business is going to be way more likely to get you out of that jam than a company that you just found on the internet, emailed once or twice, and then you signed an RFP. So it's really integrating into those better business practices and figuring out what's going to help my business survive and grow through what we know. The market goes up and down. Like we can pretty much predict an unpredictable market. Who's going to be in the trenches with you? Who's going to act like a good business and a good business partner? You can identify that pretty quickly.
So somebody engages you in your firm and they want to work with you. There's obviously a lot of things that they think they are going to do right and wrong. What would, if you had to pick one thing that the beauty industry is getting wrong for the most part, what is that?
I'm gonna call it the dart on the wall approach to sustainability. For some reason, maybe a consumer told us, maybe a market, like our investor told us, they wanted to see a sustainability thing. And so the marketing team just went like that. And we did that thing. Those one-off projects not only can be a huge waste of money, but they can actually be counterproductive because when there's not a return on that investment, you can lose a lot of momentum. You can lose a lot of internal enthusiasm, and then you see no external, there's no consumer uplift. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a larger company and they were talking about, we're trying to rebuild our sustainability approach because they did a lot on sample. Their sampling program was like one of their most popular ways of getting new customers. And so they did sample sachets, single use, not great, obviously, but a lot of companies use it. And so they said, well, we produce so many sachets, we're going to make recyclable sachets. And I remember them telling me about this and I was just thinking, why? Why on earth would you do that? I mean, I got it academically because they're producing a large volume of these sachets, but recycling facilities can't catch a sachet. It's too small, and nobody's going to put it in the recycling bin anyway. So they spent, 18 months, a few $100,000 investing in recyclable sachets, and they got nothing out of it. Nobody really cared because the consumers don't know, and it's not printed on the sachet, and they knew by the end of it, it was just going to get in the trash. And they were just, I mean, it was just devastating. You can kind of tell everyone's like, sustainability is a joke. I'm like, why'd you do it that way? And this is why I always start with a diagnostic because you've got to figure out what makes sense for your business, for your consumer, for your distribution chain. I mean, there are a lot of lenses you need to put on that strategy before you hit go on a project. And it can be a one-off project. It can be, an 18-month roadmap, but you should never be just dart on a wall, just tossing an idea out there and hoping it lands because it's difficult to get right. But once you've tailored it, once you've really thought about it and thought about what it means to you as a business, it can be so much more straightforward. But yeah, when I see brands do things like that, it just breaks my heart because they put their all into it and it wasn't likely to succeed.
Maggie, such a breath of fresh air and reason to be optimistic too. If you're a brand founder and you're looking for some clarity or the someone to illuminate the path to travel, certainly Maggie and her team at Source Beauty are somebody you want to engage just to bring all of this because it is, just from the outside looking in, it could be so overwhelming to think about all the different tasks that are involved in that. And you need somebody like you and your team to really just sort of, I'll use it in my terms, dumb this down for me, right? Like to make it much more apparent for you about the do's and the don'ts. So thank you for sharing all this information. How does somebody get in touch with you if they're done and after they watch this episode, they could be like, we need her. We need this. How do
Yeah.
they get in touch with you?
Well, anyone's welcome to email me. So I'm Maggie@sourcebeauty.co. And then I post a lot of education on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's one of those, I feel like the last bastion of civilized discourse on the internet. But it's great because there are so many people who are really engaged in thought leadership on LinkedIn. So I post a lot on LinkedIn, and then I have a quarterly newsletter that I send out from my website that's just got, education, resources. And then I also do a lot of like Climate Week. We'll do a whole schedule for beauty. I organize a lot of events during Suppliers Day and Cosmoprof. And I just love bringing people together from all walks of the industry, sustainability or not. And it's fun to get people together. So I also organize those happy hours every few months.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you again for joining us.
You.